Good morning everyone. Hello. Welcome back to my channel. So this is my Just Because quilt. So if you've been with me a little while, you'll know all about it. For those of you who are new, I'm achieving, I guess not achieving, we haven't finished it yet, but I'm hoping to achieve a finished lap quilt, and it's all going to be hand stitched, and I'm applying lots of techniques that I've been using, doing lots of hand stitched, slow stitched pieces for journals and, you know, just general small little projects of collaging fabrics together. And I thought, well, let's go bigger. I was inspired by Rachel from Roxy Creations, who had a quilt given to her from her mother Judy, and this is a technique that Judy used to create that lap quilt, and Rachel's now creating one for her daughter. Now, at the beginning of the project, I decided to sort of focus my fabric selection around fabrics that are either from Rachel or some of her printed panels that are available in her Etsy store to purchase, and maybe have to bring in some, well, I'd say I will have to bring in some fabrics of my own that complement the design. In addition, as the weeks roll on, week one is just selecting the fabrics and getting them all stitched down with some running stitch. Week 2, week 3, week 4 is all about embellishing the piece. There's no set structure to what is done in those final 3 weeks of each month. It could be choose some lace that you want to stitch onto your quilt, highlight stitch a flower, add in an additional element on top of your already stitched down piece. So on the back of my quilt is also another selection of fabrics, which at the moment is going to be not feed sacks, I keep saying that, flower sacks, vintage antique flower sacks, and I have a very small collection, but you never know, we've got a year, I might come across a few more in my travels, and also some of my favourite Tim Holtz fabric. So we are now at the end of the month, the last Friday, and I'm hoping that you're all keeping up. You've had the whole month to stitch, and I've noticed in our Facebook group, Stitched Vintage Treasures, that most of you had the running stitch all done very early in the month, which is giving you a bit of time to, I guess, look for treasures to add to your pieces. So in addition to some of the treasures, I have come back through and just added random stitching, just random lines of stitch, sort of because I've got time. I finished stitching my flower. I'll just bring it up to the camera so you can see the finished product. Thread painting, I guess, is the term at the moment, but I don't want to do too much of that type of work because I've got to be careful that whatever stitching I do once the panel is created, I don't want it to come through on the other side. So yes, I want to thread paint, but I need to be very careful with the way I slide my needle through all of the different layers. And because I have a thin cotton batting between the two layers, it's allowing me to slither that needle through, but I do have to keep checking that it doesn't pop through. You might not be concerned with that. You might like to see the outline of something happening and you turn your quilt over to find what did happen on this side. It's up to you. But I'm attempting to keep my highlight stitching just as a little element here and there. This here, see the blue? I had thread left from doing the outline of my flower, and I put a line through there, a line through there, and a line through there. Just a little extra stitching. I still feel like I've got a spot here that could be something, but I'm not going to make that decision until I find something. There's just no rush. It'll be creating a series of blocks, 12 in total, that will all come together at some point to make a quilt. I might find that I get 3 of them made and I join those 3 together to create a line of them. And then the next block would come in here, another 3, or I could go up. Who knows? I just don't want to make those types of decisions at this stage. Excuse me, I think I'm going to cough. Getting a few questions in the comments. Most of them are pretty easy to answer, but you know, typing an answer versus sort of talking it through with you. So one of the questions is, how big are my blocks? I have pre-cut some more for future months. Now, most lap quilts, when you Google it, are 50 inches by 50 inches or 50 inches by 60 inches, which is where I'd planned to start out. Then when it came to actually cutting the blocks down, just due to using what fabric I had, my block was 17 inches across and nearly 18.5 inches high. Now I went that little bit extra, because there was some fabric that was sitting there, and I thought, well, why trim off a little bit when I could just use it? And I thought, you know, at the end of the day, I'm quite tall. So I thought by having that little bit extra length and pick up an inch everywhere on all the blocks is potentially another 4 inches, you know, on the height of my quilt. But that's up to you. And look, at the end of the day, there'd be no reason why you couldn't insert a smaller block at the end of the project if you felt like it needed to be a bit longer. It will not matter. And why? Because, as you know, we're leaving these overhangs. I'm running stitch just up to it, 1/4 of an inch, so that I can manipulate these fabrics to join in the next block. Okay, and that's one of the big questions. How are you going to join them in? I will quickly show you again. Now, because I'm using a rectangle, I need to be mindful that it is the right way. That was the right way. Down to the bottom. You know, have I cut them exactly the same? Probably not. Looks like I haven't. But that's okay. Won't matter. So what I plan to do is just overlap it ever so slightly. You could even butt it together. But an overlap is good too. That's how Rachel's doing it. She's overlapping it a good 1/2 inch. It's up to you. I'm thinking I'm going to butt them together just to keep the bulk down. I'll get needle and thread, as in sewing machine cotton thread, and I'm just going to whip stitch it together. So let's pretend I've done that. Not going to do it at this stage. And then these flappy bits of fabric will continue on to the next panel. And if you've got a panel that's here stitched like this, and you've got 2 flappy bits, and people have been saying, well, what do you do then? Well, you pick which one you want to overlap, and the other one can be trimmed away. Let's say there was a piece of fabric that come here, and I thought, it's going to cover the rows. I prefer the rows. Well, then I might decide to have that piece of fabric go underneath and the rows go on top. So I would then trim this guy back. Let's save that morsel. Where's a piece of fabric? Let me show you what I mean. Okay. Let's pretend that this panel is all stitched and there's a bit of overlap on him. Let's say that that's there. So now I'm like, okay, time to join the panel. I can get in there and pin that out of my way because you want to join it first. So I'm just sort of giving you a preemptive view of the future. This won't be next week or even at the end of next month, the joining. It'll be in 6 months' time or whenever, but it might give you confidence to at least start the project if you know where we're heading. So I would now whip stitch through there just with some cream cotton. I've only got blue sitting here next to me, but just sewing machine cotton. I wouldn't use blue because you're going to see it. I'd use cream. I'm using this to tack down fabric so that when I remove it, I can easily see where it is. So that would be stitched together. Now it comes time to doing some running stitch to mold it all together. And I've got 2 choices because there just happens to be 2 overlaps. May not be on all of your pieces, but I'd like that one, or would I like that one? I would go that one because I see the roses. So I would trim that white edge off because it's not needed. I would then bring this fabric in, trim that excess off. So let's assume that I have done that. This guy lies over the top. That white edge is gone as well. And I'm ready to put some running stitch through there. So that's how these pieces will meet. I hope that explains it. You might decide that this whole overlap business is just too messy. There's nothing stopping you finishing right on that edge and right on that edge. The only thing is when you join them together, you're going to see a definite split. So then you will see exactly where your blocks are. I don't want that look. I want it to look like one big quilt. So I'm having these overlap pieces. Nothing stopping you coming back through and dropping on some more fabric. You can certainly do that to disguise all of those joins. You might want to do that. Go for it. That'd be the solution to get around the fact that your pieces are all evenly cut, evenly stitched to the size of the base block. That 17" by 18.5" block. I'm just giving myself flexibility. Okay, I think that's most of the questions answered. Oh, binding. Now, in the last video, I started just picking fabrics that could start on this side and whip around to that side. That's how I'm binding my quilt. You could do a more traditional method where you have heaps of pieces stitched together to create a long strip of fabric, and then around you go. There's no reason why you can't do that as well. I'm just finding that if I've got an overhang, see this red piece, it was a little bit longer. So that's sort of what happened. I took it over the edge of my quilt. Now I'm using this flour sack and I've actually unpicked it so that it's opened up flat. And I have this edge here of threads that thread was used to create this flour sack. I've left it in there because I love how that feels. I'm hoping that that can be a feature when it joins another block. I can see a little bit of that seam through here underneath the red. See how the red kicked up there? And I can feel the texture of that. I love that. I'm leaving it. I'm not being fastidiously neat at all. This is a scrappy, organic feeling piece. So that's a point I just wanted to make there, that if you've got like a folded seam, see this piece of fabric here? There's an edge there. I've left it because that tells me that that probably was a tea towel. Feels a bit tea towelish, probably was a tea towel. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to go through in today's video. So I mentioned last Friday that I'm looking for highlight elements now because my base is done, which is what that is, and a little bit of lace. I then added a bit more printed fabric where I felt like there was a gap. I look at my piece and go, well, there's potentially something could go here just because there's no print. Whether something does or not, who knows? Doesn't matter. Now flipping over to my underside of the quilt, which is a combination of Tim Holtz fabrics and these flour sacks. All episode I kept feeling like I needed something. So I went through my doilies and I chose this one. These are just random ones that I've purchased recently and they're just sort of kicking around on my desk, and I threw them into the tray. I don't know if I'll use them. They're just here. They're just, you know, treasures. I love the colours, very primary colours. I feel like it complements the colours in this, and it also complements the colours that seem to be forming here. So this is the piece I've chosen. You've got a couple options. You could stitch it down, showing the beautiful crocheted edge, and then just cut it back a little bit. This is the bit I've been thinking about all week. It's been sitting here on it, and I'm like, well, how much doily do I want? You know, the doily look. And I just don't think I want that this time. So the plan is to fussy cut out this and get it as close as I can. Is that a mark, is it? Oh no, just a piece of paper caught on it. I'm going to fussy cut it out and get it as close as I can. I'm lucky that the background and the doily is very similar. And then the idea is just to hand stitch it on. And remembering, because I've got this batting in the middle, I'm pretty confident I can use a fine needle and thread and stitch this on, and it won't show through to the other side. So that's what I plan to do. What I might do is I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to go back and sit at my desk with the camera. You guys won't need a big view of it. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So I'll be with you in a moment as I relocate. Won't be long. Okay, I'm back. Oh, I feel much more comfortable sitting down. The thread I'm going to use to stitch this little guy on is just some sewing machine thread. The blue one I just showed you, that's an old thread from my grandmother's cottons that I inherited. She was a wedding dressmaker, so that would have been a bridesmaid's dress colour, I'm guessing. And it's quite soft, as in it breaks easily due to its age. This is a recently purchased thread, so I guess what I'm trying to say is it's all well and good reusing old threads and things that you may have had in your stash, but just be mindful that if it's going to be used on something that will be laundered, you might want to use a more modern thread. Maybe the old vintage threads can be used for tacking and then they're removed. Be my only thought. So I'm going to fussy cut this out. So while I do that, I might just think of some other questions that I get asked regularly. Oh, I know a good one. My scissors. These are my favourite scissors, especially for fussy cutting. I've got all these little fancy gold ones around at the moment. This one I got from Fleur Wood's course that I did. This is my go-to, and I've had it for a few, well, I say I've had it for a few years, but it's my second pair because the first pair got confiscated by security at the Melbourne airport because I didn't realise that it was tucked into my sewing kit that I was going to stitch with sitting at the airport. Unfortunately, you can have tiny itty-bitty scissors to snip a thread, but anything with a long blade. And the lady, she was so sweet. She was on the conveyor belt and the bag got isolated and come over here, madam. And she opened, well, I opened up the case and she saw all the beautiful embroidery and she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, it's all right, that's okay. I should have realised. I thought it was in my checked luggage, but it wasn't. So I had to order another pair, which is where I'm heading with this comment. Folks are asking me where they find them. The brand is Fiskars, Fiskars. You have to hunt for them a little bit because they're not at Spotlight. That's an Australian version of Joann's and Michael's. They are usually at a hardware because they're pruning scissors. These are scissors that a florist would use to remove stems, buds, things like that. So when you type into the Google search the brand, put in their pruning scissors as well, and they've got this really nice big handle for hands that prune all day. There's a bit of softness to that yellow. It's like a rubber compound, so it's just a bit more gentle, and they're sharp. So that's the trick to finding them. I think that's what's been stumping everyone, is they're going to their sewing supply outlet and they're seeing quite a large range of scissors by this brand. They're not seeing that one. That's why. They're pruning scissors. I don't even know how I came onto them. I can't remember if I just stumbled onto them and thought, gee, I'll give them a go. Or someone was using them and that was how I don't know. I've had them in my hands for at least 2 years. Mind you, they're my second pair. But, you know, they're not cheap. and you can find lots of little pointy little sharp scissors at better prices, and you could blunt them and probably buy 50 pairs to the price of those. So, you know, it's up to you. These aren't too bad too because they've got this big handle. They're starting to pop up everywhere as well. This little, it's got a stalk. Is it a stork or dragon? Dragon. So I think if you type into the Google search, dragon gold-handled dragon scissors, and see what pops up. And there's all sorts of sizes in those as well. I think I first saw these with Anne Brooks. She has some amazing scissors. They aesthetically look great, not always the nicest to use, but for cutting threads, they look super cool. So I'm getting rid of this excess. I was just waiting for a project for some of these special doilies, you know, they're sitting in a pile in the cupboard. So it's going to be lovely to have them draped over my legs so I can admire the work. For those of you who want to do a lot of stitching, as in this type of stitching on your quilt, go for it. I'm not going to do that. I'm trying to keep my workload a little bit less than normal for the next few months at least. So I'm more than happy to use some of my treasures. I need to get hold of the box of doilies at the farm that my mum has. She was not a big doily stitcher, but she had a heap that were purchased through her time from different linen parties and, you know, things like that. And they're sitting there, and if Mum loved them and they were sitting in that box, I wouldn't mind using them in this piece just to have them find a home. And a lot of them from memory are machine stitched ones, you know, in the 60s and 70s, they were sort of part of wedding gift packages and things like that. I see them in op stores and I pick them up as well, and I'm like, oh, I remember that from Mum's dining table, or, you know, especially those cross-stitched ones. So I hope to get my nose in that container and just have a look what's in there and see if there's anything that sort of suits the quilt and work it in. At the moment, the doily element is staying on this side because I think it'll be quite plain with these bags with just pops of some of the Tim Holtz fabrics, because I've got the two designers that I'm sort of working within. Oh, Fudgy's up and he's smooching the camera stand. Hey, Fudgy. I'm nearly there. Hey, Fudge. Don't bump it, baby. All right. So this lace, I'll just keep close to the project because who knows, something like that trimmed off could go on the other side of the quilt, or even just stitched on. You know, let me trim it. I don't want it looking dangly and daggy. So I might just tidy it up. Then I can put it with the project, and who knows. Maybe we flip that over and see if we can find a little home for a piece. I just didn't want that big doily look on this project. I sort of feel like that's a separate project again, and oh gosh, I'd love to do something like that. Let's just tidy this up. I've just left a little edge there. It just gives me something to stitch into when the piece goes down, or something to tuck in behind so it looks like it's hidden. Who knows? But just to tidy up. Before we get sidetracked, let's just see if this is going to work. Yes, it is. So now, hello, Fudgy. Oh, I love it, guys. I love it. It's the colours. Like how close it's meant to be. I might bring it down onto the Tim Holtz fabric a little bit so it sort of catches that border and then leads its way up. It's going to be interesting how it all unfolds, making sure that it's nice and flat. Grab my pins and just start. I might use those little applique pins actually. They're tiny and they nestle in nicely, so you don't have all these big pins hanging out everywhere at you. So I've got my homework now. The stitch I'll use to hold this down will be an overcast stitch, so that the edge, the raw edge of this fabric, has that stitch holding it all together. There's no reason why you couldn't do a running stitch, but with time your little piece will get a bit of a frayed look. You might like that and be happy to have that, but I'm going to do an overcast stitch. That way I know it's nice and secure. I don't mind these pieces of fabrics getting a bit fray. That's fine. But I don't want to lose any of that embroidery, the integrity of the embroidery. Those thick little applique pins are quite hard to push into there. So I'm going to go to a normal pin. That's a bit better. Well, how exciting. We've got to our first block completed. Now it's up to you when you join them. It's up to you. You might want to join them as you go. You might want to wait to the end and then you can lay them all out and find their final positions. I sort of know that this is a bottom corner, but I haven't come up the sides yet, so maybe it's in the center at the bottom. Who knows? I'm just going to go with the flow and not overthink it. This is not that traditional style of quilting where you know your pattern and you've got to follow the blocks and the blocks all connect to make the bigger piece. It's a lot more, what's the best word? Freedom to do whatever. A year's a long time, so who knows what things I'll find that I want to add to my quilt. Okay, I think that's great. I love it. It's just simple. Simple. All right, let's flip this over and see if there is a spot for a little bit of this. Who knows? There might be. There might not be. If I was to trim that back a little more and I stitch that in there, maybe. No, I think it's because the white, such a polar white. I don't think I can find a spot. I think I might just add that to my stash. What about here? Just a quick little look. I don't mind that. If I could get that up, can I? Oh, there's a stitch there that's going to stop it. I don't really want that tea towel to look like it's got an edge, do I? No, look, I'm going to leave it. I'm just going to pop it away in the stash. Who knows? It's so beautiful, and I know I'll use it someday, somewhere. So let's just keep it nice and safe. All right, guys, let's get back to this side. I'm going to grab my cotton. And if I had Reg, the needle that used to jab me all the time, which I accidentally cut his head off and is no longer, he would be perfect. Now, Reg was a really fine, had a slight bend in him needle, but I'm sure I've got Reg cousins here. And I'm going for a fine needle because it can, hey Fudgy, slither through. There we go. Here's a Reginald cousin. Just a little guy. I'm going to do my sneaky knot because I'm sick of having to thread my needle all the time. And because it's cotton, I can do a little knot there, just the one like you're doing a shoelace, that first turn before you start the bow. I can do, yeah, a little knot, and it won't affect the thread coming through the fabric. I'm going to trim that off because I want that knot to disappear. Now I tend to work towards myself. There's a fudgy fur piece. Fudgy, take your fur back, son. So I will put my needle through. Be careful not to go through the other side of the quilt because we're doing some little sneaky stitches. I might just zoom in for anyone who is looking at overcast stitch. This is what I mean. So I've hidden the knot under my little piece of embroidery. I've come up through, and now I'm just going to slip through the back and the piece of embroidery and do a little stitch, and again and again. Now I'm going to put them fairly close together. They're just little nibbly stitches, just a little bit. Being careful, of course, not to go through the other side. I don't want them too obvious. It's not about these little stitches, it's about the embroidery. So I'm just going to take my time and work around the quilt, securing that down. Now, if you want to add glue, you can. You have a couple options. You could use what quilters use, these glue sticks to tack it on. I would stay away from the edges because this is quite a dense glue, and you rub the edge of your cut work, you'll unravel it really quickly. You could, and I've used this hundreds of times, art glitter glue. You can get a really fine line of glue out of this and put it on the edge of your piece, and that will also help frame. I'm not too concerned. I want that soft blended look, and all these little edges are going to be similar. I've left a little bit of margin there on that embroidery, so it's not like the embroidery is going to fall to bits. Now, you don't have to add a doily element. You might have some other decorative piece that you want to stitch on your quilt, some memory. It might be a piece of a silk tie that belonged to someone that you wanted, just a morsel of that piece of fabric somewhere on your quilt. And if the back of your quilt is plainish, I'll say plain-ish because it's not going to be probably as plain as what it looks here, because I don't have 12 flower sacks for a start, and I do want a little bit of Tim Holtz fabric, you know, peeking through. Look, I've got a knot there. Look at that. See that running stitch? There's a little knot in a thread that I didn't notice. I'm going to leave it. It is what it is. You could attempt to get that undone and then pull your threads until you absorb it, but look, it's a hand-stitched quilt. And in 100 years' time, when this turns up on some YouTuber's desk and they go, wow, look at that, you can even see where there's a dodgy little stitch. Well, I will be smiling. Be like, gee, you got good eyes, you picked that up. There we go. I'm just going to work around this little piece, stitching it down. So that brings us to the end of the 4th week within the month of just embellishing our quilt with some treasures. Like I said, I tried to work out exact prompts, but every quilt is going to be different out there, and some of you may not want to go to this extent. You might want to just do what Rachel is doing and focus on selecting your fabrics, getting them all stitched down, and then that's it. That's fine. You might embellish your quilt in 10 years' time when you have a collection of something and go, well, you know what? I'm going to stitch them onto my quilt. And you can, because you using needle and thread, you can come in and do these little things and it's not going to show through. So you wouldn't even know I've been there. The beauty of slow stitching a quilt. I just feel like a quiet day of simple stitching, and this is exactly what I need at the moment. Don't have to think too much. Let's remove that little pin and just stitch. But I am looking forward to the next video where we get to piece the fabrics again. I think the first video of every month is going to be the favourite, because you don't know what your next panel is going to look like until you do it. I do hear from some of you saying that you've already pieced together, you know, quite a few of them. That's fine, go for it. If you're in a mood to lay down all of your patches of fabric from your collection, and some of you have even said that you've just then let it sit, and for the next few weeks you glance at it, you move things, you readjust. That's just glorious. I think that's the best part of the project. Just having a play, and, you know, I don't really get that luxury because I film it and do it with you guys. And then often I'm straight into the basting it down or tacking it down with that blue thread ready for me to sit and stitch. So often I sit back down with it and go, you know what, that piece might have looked nicer over there. But look, at the end of the day, when there's a quilt draped across your knee, unless it's really jarringly, you know, you don't like it, well then of course stop and adjust, but it will just be a wash of colour and texture. So I hope I've answered all your questions throughout the month. I hope you all have a clear direction of where we're heading. I think it is a simple project. I know it sounds epic, but there's a lot of you that have said, oh, that's a lot. And have you joined in at a later stage, because I think you've gone, oh, actually, I can do that. It's just making decisions, tacking it down, placing your running stitch in. Give yourself a few hangover bits on sides so that you've got a bit of wriggle room when it comes to joining it. Unless, of course, you want that distinctive square look. There's nothing wrong with that as well. And you can patch in over all of those joints if you decide the square look isn't for you either. You just add more fabric and keep stitching. That's the beauty of it. You don't have to make all of your decisions now, I don't think. Okay, my thread is getting... That was another question. How do you end off your thread, whether it be a running stitch or a decorative stitch or a stitch that I'm doing here? Of course, if you can get your needle under a corner of fabric and you can do the classic, you know, pick up a bit of fabric and do the twist and pull it through, fine. It's hidden. If you can't, then there's nowhere to hide, which is often the case when you're doing a decorative, you know, piece, like you're stitching a flower. In that case, you just bury your stitch. So I'd go in there, haven't come through the back, and then I'd do a U-turn by going back in very close to where I came up, do it again, change directions of the needle a few times, and do it again, and you will find that that just mats down in behind and it's not going anywhere because you've inadvertently created some little turns in under it all. It's not going anywhere. If it was a piece of clothing, you probably want to try and get a knot somewhere, but this, yeah, it's not going anywhere. When you're stitching down a piece like this, you'll always have to manipulate it a little bit. It's just dawned on me why that quilt panel was slightly different size to this. When you stitch, it gets smaller. So all of these stitches that I've done has pulled it in just that little bit. So when let me zoom up a little bit. When I got that piece that sat here to the side and I went, oh, it's smaller, did I cut it wrong? No, I didn't, because this is stitched, that wasn't. So that's what's brought it in a little bit in height and probably width too. Okay, what was I saying? Yeah, just keep checking that your piece is sitting flat. Instead of following the line around, I might come back here and come around that top to secure that. It's up to you how you get your elements stitched down, but just be mindful that when they're fussy cut like this, they can wriggle a bit. There's a bit of, you know, fabric moves. So just take your time to make sure everything's sitting nice. You might find that it's got a bit puckered. Just keep it, you know, sitting nice. All right, I think that's all I wanted to do today. I've got my decorative piece. Nothing ended up coming over here. And we're pretty much ready to start a whole new panel next month. How exciting. There you go, we made it. 1 month in, we made it. Your Just Because quilt is coming along nicely. Don't forget that if you are on YouTube doing a quilt as well and you are using some of Rachel's fabrics, please throw in the hashtag that I'm using, just so that I can't remember the exact words and I don't want to say it because it's not here in front of me. I think it's, no, I'm not going to say it. Have a look in the description, guys, and just copy it across to your videos. That way, any videos we make using Rachel's fabrics, that hashtag will bring it all together, even if it's a vessel or a page in a journal or a panel in the Just Because quilt. At least Rachel's fabrics are getting noticed out there. Also, I noticed too, Rachel's got a Christmas range of fabrics. By the time this video comes to air, you may already know that, but I did spot them and I thought, oh, how tempting. All right, guys, I'm going to say goodbye and I'll leave you all to it and see you next Friday for panel number 2. Yay, how exciting. All right, guys, look after yourselves. Bye.